Anybody there?
Dr. Heine, can you hear me?
Yes.
I am so sorry. I can't get on my computer, so now I'm on my phone. So now I'm trying to figure out how to let you share your screen off of my app. So
I can.
give me 1 second.
I got it.
You got it? Thank you.
Um,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
you're good. I might have to change which screen I'm sharing though, because it popped over to the speaker view. So let's do screen one. Okay. I think everybody see that now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now you can say whatever you're going to say.
Okay. Sorry for the delay, everyone. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Chris Heine. She is the Equine Extension Specialist for OSU, and today she's going to give us a little bit of information about horses and donkeys.
Okay, so and we can definitely, if people have questions, feel free to shout them out. I may not be able to see if you drop them in the chat, so yeah, I don't mind if you unmute and ask me a question or not. And trying to fit within the guidelines and doing things pretty quickly. There's a lot to talk about with horses, so I'm gonna kind of hit the highlights of what we're gonna do. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So my nice little waving green. So with the time constraints that we had, I'm gonna stay pretty high level here. Kind of just talk about some basic guidelines relative to feeding, kind of some basic housing. I might ask you guys some questions and then kind of give you a little bit of rundown on pasture and forage. So I might ask a question right now, and you guys can put your hands up. How many of you have horses that are on the call? Do we have the little raise the hand icon thing in this? Okay, I got one. Okay, so two, Bridget has one. Okay, so hopefully I'll provide some information for those of you that have horses, and this won't be too basic for you. So again, you can feel free to ask questions. Okay, so we're just gonna do like the very tippy tip of horse nutrition, kind of some basics and just kind of some guidelines on how to make sure you're meeting basic needs. So, sometimes you think this doesn't even bear mentioning, but certainly this time of year, horses can get in a lot of trouble if we're not checking regularly. And I think people kind of forget how much water the horse can actually consume. So if I'm going to do my what horses have to have all the time, they obviously always have to have water. So where we see issues with that summer, where people aren't checking water tanks frequently enough or aren't refilling buckets enough, and in the winter, when we don't give them an open source of water, when we get those really cold spells in Oklahoma, we need to make sure that we planned ahead. Just kind of some fun facts for you guys. If you ask horses, and trust me, researchers have done this, horses actually prefer troughs and buckets over the push valves. So if you are in the position to be installing equipment with horses, and you do want to have automatic water. So I know reality says that we use them quite a bit. We want to make sure that the flow rate on those are fast enough so that horses don't actually kind of walk away thirsty because they're not getting enough water intake quickly. So just a little food for thought. And again, temperatures like we've been having, rather than hanging one bucket and refilling it twice a day, we probably need to have a couple buckets in those stalls to make sure we're meeting that water intake. If you're traveling with horses, so that can actually be a bit of a problem. Horses can get dehydrated really quick on the road. Trailering takes a lot of work, a lot of muscular work. If you've ever had the opportunity to ride in a horse trailer, you'll know that horse actually has to balance quite a bit, especially if you're doing a lot of starting, stopping, curves, etc. And horses can be pretty picky. So even if they may be hot and sweaty and almost dehydrated, they may not drink unfamiliar water. So the picture I have up here is, one that people that travel with horses quite a bit and that compete with actually will use, and that is having this big water tank here. So the horse actually has water that they're used to. So you can kind of limit that. I don't really want to drink that foreign water. People will also use kind of some flavoring agents as well when horses are on the road. But before you do that, I always recommend that you've actually acclimated to the horse first. So don't just like go to the rodeo and bring cherry Kool-Aid and expect them to drink it. Like, so you actually have to teach the horse to drink some of these masking agents as well. Again, after we hit horses have to have water, the next thing that I always say is horses have to have salt. And so no matter how much feed the horse is consuming, they're never going to hit their salt requirement. So horses or feed commonly has about 1% salt in it, which if you think about how much the horse ingests, that's not enough. So we always have to make sure the horse has access to salt. If you ask the horse, again, horse preference, loose salt is better than blocks. So horses' tongues actually are not as good at licking salt blocks as cattle are. They still will use them, so it is an acceptable way to offer salt, but they actually do ingest more if we provide a loose salt. Generally, rule of thumb is if you don't see like the little lip groove here in this horse's salt block, or if that salt block is dusty, they may not actually be using it very much. Choice of salt comes up quite a bit. Anything that's red, like that horse is licking on right there, is one that's a trace mineralized block. So they are designed to meet the horse's, copper, zinc, trace mineral requirements, etc., but only if the horse consumes it in the correct amount. And so that is always assuming that they are intaking the amount the manufacturer wanted them to. So again, why we sometimes want to make sure that's provided in the feed and not just leave it up to the salt block. And then just remember white salt, especially in the summer, white salt is just salt. And certainly, when it's really hot out, we do actually advise that you actually will kind of top dress salt to replace some of those electrolytes the horses are losing with sweating. And so that's usually, a couple tablespoons. You could add a little bit of loose salt in with their feed and they'll eat that and lick it up, no problem. So when we think about feeding with horses, we always want to remember forage is the base. It is absolutely the base of the pyramid with what horses are eating. Yes, this picture is not hay, this is straw, but when I did my little Google image search, it just pulled that up. I was like, fine. So when we're thinking about feeding forage to horses, there's a variety of ways that can be presented to them. So pastured horses, that can count as forage, and we'll talk about that a little bit later today. Most of the time people think about it as harvested hay, whether that's round bales, small squares, big rectangles. We do feed a lot of hay just because we don't have a growing source of forage throughout the year. And then we can also use processed hay. So especially when we're talking about senior horses or when we've got maybe hay is hard to come by for a variety of reasons. Hay also comes as a processed hay that can be cubed or pelleted. So essentially a bag form. Some other parts of the country you may see like haylage. I've even seen some bagged sort of haylage at the feed store. So there are a variety of options that will still kind of count as that forage. But always, always, always remember when you're feeding your horse, all decisions are made off of the forage the horse is actually consuming. The other guideline that we want to give people, and this is important when you're thinking about how much hay should you actually purchase for the year, typically horses will voluntarily consume about 2 to 2.5% of their body weight. In an ideal world, I want the horse to get that 2% in forage. There's a reason for that, for gut health, mental health, decreasing behavior disorders. But always our rule of thumb is absolute minimum is 1% of their body weight. So we'll do a little audience participation here. So if I said, what is the minimum amount a horse can consume in forage? Anybody know what that would be? You can type it in the chat. What is the absolute minimum that the horse should eat and forage. And there's a border collie squeaking toys in the back. So apparently her toys are being taken away. Okay, so how many pounds? Yes, 1% is the minimum, but how many pounds? I've got an 1,100-pound horse. So what is the absolute minimum I can feed that horse and forage per day? 11. Very good, Colt. So 11 pounds. So what's the ideal amount? It should be easy math. I bet you Cole can figure this out. So how many pounds? There you go, 22 pounds. And so if you're thinking about, a 50, 60 pound bale of hay, a small rectangular bale, they may eat a third to a half of that bale, depending on the weight of the bale. But in generally, probably about a third of a bale per day. So when we talk about, a lot of people really focus in on the concentrate or the grain that the horse is actually consuming. But when we decide whether or not we're going to feed horses grain or concentrate, you do have to think about does the horse need it or not? So, and we don't really have time to completely get into body condition scoring with horses and how that actually works. But essentially, I have to look, does the horse need calories or not? So if it's a thin horse, I probably need to feed him some concentrate so I can put a little weight on him. But if it's an overweight horse, I might have to think about how do I offer the horse nutrients but not add calories to that. So that's really important, is to be honest to yourself and say, does the horse need calories or not? Yes, horses like to eat grain. They're going to be happy when you feed them. But again, we have to decide, is this a good idea or not? Certainly the class of the horse, some horses have higher nutrient requirements. So growing horses, brood mares, etc., need a little bit more in the diet than a older maintenance horse. And so those horses typically are pretty good candidates for providing concentrate to them. And then the other thing to always remember is the grain that I choose, or the concentrate that I choose, is going to be based on the forage the horse is getting. So if a horse is eating alfalfa, he doesn't really need a very high protein feed because he's getting so much of that from his hay. Versus if a horse is consuming, native prairie that's like 5% protein, then I probably need to make sure that the feed that I pick, or the concentrate that I pick, is higher in protein to kind of offset that forage. So in all reality, when I select a grain for the horse, it is absolutely going to be based on whether the horse needs calories or not, what type of horse it is, and what forage I'm actually feeding him. All right, so I have another question for you guys, so you can type it in the chat. Here's a little horse here, Gracie the horse. Does this horse need grain? And so you can type in your answer. What do you guys think? Apparently I've stumped you all. Any ideas? All right, let's see. All right, so Colt, you're going to win the audience participation award here. So probably not. Why did you say probably not? Bridget says no. Why do you guys think that this horse does not need grain? And you can be honest. Yeah, so Bridget says she looks like she has good body condition. Good is a nice way of saying it. So she has more than what she needs, would maybe be a more accurate way to say it. This little horse here already has kind of a big crusty neck. She is carrying a lot of weight on her. And so this, yeah, a little curvy, that's a nice way to say it. Yeah, so I'd actually on this horse be wanting to pull weight off of her. And so while this little horse may appreciate some grain, she does not need it. Okay, so we might have to figure out a different way to feed her. So, And I just picked one direction to go because we could either talk about feeding thin horses, and I decided, well, let's just talk a little bit about feeding overweight horses. So if you have a horse like the gray mare that I just showed you, or this little one here, both of these horses are really pretty overweight. And so that does not change the fact that they still actually have nutrient requirements, right? So we still have to make sure that they're meeting their vitamin and mineral needs, that they have adequate protein for maintenance. And so it's a really good option to think about using ration balancers. And so these are feeds that are designed, again, to be fed in only pretty small quantities, so only 1 to 2 pounds per day. So therefore, it doesn't provide a lot of extra calories to the horse, but is still providing everything else they need. So these are really, really good options for horses, again, that may be carrying a little bit too much weight, but we still want to make sure that they're getting enough of the nutrients that they need to maintain normal body function. So this one also is probably needs to be moved out of this pasture because there's a lot of horsemen around the ground too. But anyhow, we'll talk about that in a minute. All right. So then I wanted to talk about housing a little bit. Again, I'm just going really, really basic for you guys. And again, if people have questions, feel free to stop me and ask. And a lot of times when I'm talking about what do horses need, my first criteria on the answer is always, well, it's got to be safe. Horses actually are able to hurt themselves really, really easily. And so if you're going to house horses, you sort of need to get an eye for, is this an environment that they can hurt themselves or not? So that is always, always key. Also, when we think about housing horses, horses do need to have shelter. Okay, so we do need to shelter them from sun, wind, and rain, and insects. And in Oklahoma, there's a lot of flying insects that really will leave horses alone if they're in the dark, but otherwise can be pretty bad. So you'll see horses will actually kind of seek some darker areas really just to escape the insects. What we need to remind people, though, is that shelter can be man-made, so such as this nice run-in shed here, loafing shed, and it can be natural. So it's just that they have shelter, right? So if you have trees in a pasture, that actually can provide shelter for them in some circumstances. So it's not always 100% necessary that it's a man-made structure. So I have pictures of two different horse housing here, so that would feed the requirement of shelter. But I want to have you guys look at these and then tell me what you think. So again, this is a little bit of the audience participation. You can type in, what do we think about these shelters for these horses here? Who has a thought? So I know Bridget and Colt have been chiming in. I think whoever is the username DANAM had horses, so that person could chime in what their thoughts are. What do you think? Might have to pick on somebody here. The first, okay, here we go. All right, the first shelter, not much protection against wind or strong rain. I would agree. So for me, this top shelter, it might provide a little bit of shade, but that shade is going to kind of move around. When I think about it in windy Oklahoma, my inclination is like, is it even going to stay there? So I don't know that this would really fit a lot. It's probably not going to keep insects off of them, to be honest, because they really kind of have to get back in the dark. And again, this might work in some circumstances, but I would have my doubts a little bit. The only thing it's going to do is maybe some kind of transient shade that's going to move around. So I don't know that I'm in love with this one. Whoops, don't want to speed up here. The bottom one provides more shelter to the horse, but this one for me, and that's why I picked this one. This one for me has a little bit of red flags. Can anybody else see something that I might be like, not sure I'm in love with this one? So what might be wrong with this shelter? No windows or fresh air? Not very. Yeah, you guys are awesome. Yeah, so this one in Oklahoma would be no horse would go in there, right? I mean, are you kidding me? They'd die. So there's no ventilation, no fresh air. So I don't like that at all. Also, not very tall. Very good. So if you think this horse, if he did something stupid, he could totally bang his head on this. Okay, so I don't like this. Bridget said, need both sides of the door open. Yeah, this is a pretty narrow opening. Okay. Even for just one horse, I like a bit of a wider opening because horses really, if they feel trapped, they bang into things. And then if you guys haven't been around horses long enough, having a door that's sort of like out there, that's a recipe for disaster, right? You don't want swingy, hingy doors where horses have any access to that. Again, this is not what I would ever recommend for a horse shelter. Lots and lots wrong with here. I'm sure they had great fun building it, but this might be a good storage shed, but I would not use it for my horse. Okay, so no on that one. These ones, I just wanted to go over. This is nice and light and airy. You will often see ways to give horses a little bit more movement. Giving them access to other horses is kind of these sheds that just have a divider down, so you can kind of keep horses separate, but still feed them separately. So that's a really good option. A lot of times people also use sheds and then have runs attached to them too. So again, if you have to confine horses, but still give them freedom of motion, those are going to be my go-tos. Kind of these shed options with runs, or again, nice big open airy spaces. Horses can be in communication with each other, and all the benefits that I'm looking for in housing. How about the bottom one down here? Any thoughts on this one? So this is just a two-sided shed instead of a three-sided. Anybody looking at this one like this? Don't like it? Anybody gonna go buy the bottom shelter? Better than nothing. Okay, I like that. Better than nothing. I don't have a problem with two-sided sheds, especially if they're oriented the right way to kind of protect against the north wind and to provide shade. But when I look at this one, and this is kind of, you know, your budget, etc., to me it seems a little flimsy. When I look at different horse shelters, I'm always thinking about what can the horse do to it. And as I'm looking at this, I could see horses kicking it. It's not sturdy enough, feet going through, etc. So when you're looking at facilities for horses, you always want to think about what can the horse do, and can this be secured to the ground? So just kind of keep that in mind, because they are destructive little buggers sometimes. If we're thinking about barns, again, my number one criteria is always going to be safety. So that means looking for everything that the horse can possibly do. A lot of times, you know, we tend to think about, you know, are there nails, screws, latches, but even some of, like, again, I've seen horses do all kinds of stupid things. The little bull clips, well, they can actually get their lip hung up in that on a water bucket and rip it open. You know, little snappy clips. If the bars are spaced just right, horses can actually get their feet through it when they're doing shenanigans. And so that can result in a broken leg. So there's all like little things, space at the bottom, right? If the horse is rolling, gets the hoof under there and trapped, can be disaster. So I really am always pretty conscious about, is this facility actually safe? The other big thing in barns, and I think barn designers are getting much, much better about that, is making sure there's ventilation. You know, again, in Oklahoma, when it's hot, we really want to make sure there's good air movement through those facilities, because for heat and ammonia buildup, right? So we do really need to make sure there's good ventilation systems. And then the other thing I think we're increasingly aware of is the behavior side. Horses are a social species, and so more and more barns are built more like this one up here, So in this case, the horse can actually kind of hang their head over their stall, and you can see the bars between the stall walls actually allow for some contact between horses so that they are in visual contact and even some physical contact with each other, because again, they're herd species and they don't really feel very comfortable. So having horses that have good views essentially of what's going on around them and each other are going to really help with the behavior in a stalled horse. So really something to think about in stall design. So I'm going to contrast that to, and these are still pretty common. Okay, so you will still see a lot of these as stall kits. But if you look at these stalls, yes, they can kind of see out the front, but that's it. Okay, so they can't see through the sidewalls. This one might have a little window in the back, but that's about it. And so if there's not a lot of activity going on in this barn, this is just a horse sitting there doing nothing. And so really want to rethink a little bit more about how we house them optimally for behavior as well. And so increasingly your stall kits, if you're building those, should allow a little bit more social interaction with horses. So that's the ideal system. Now this barn, the way it's built, I'm guessing that these doors actually lead to some runs. And so then that gives you that horse that option of having some social contact and a little bit more freedom of motion. These look pretty isolated there. Okay. And then again, just as a reminder, this counts. So if you have adequate trees actually provide pretty good shade for horses. It provides some natural cooling ability because the horse will radiate their heat up to the leaves of the tree. So that actually shade under a tree is cooler than shade from a man-made structure. So you may see that horses actually prefer that. Obviously, we need to make sure that the species are not toxic to the horse. And remember, if horses are bored, right? So let's say our pasture has adequate forage in it and the horse is standing under the tree because it's hot out and they're bored, they will still chew on trees. Okay, so chewing on trees is a fairly normal horse behavior. So just realize if you have some like prized tree and a horse, it may eat your tree. So totally normal, not much you can do about it other than fence the tree off. Okay, any questions about that so far? And Lauren, how much time do we have? When do you want me to be done?
About 15 more minutes.
Okay, awesome. Well, we can roll through this. All right, so the next question that a lot of horse people typically have is about pasture. So when I think about pasture for a horse, I always say a pasture is more than something with a fence around it. Okay, so if we're looking at this picture, what do you guys think? Give me some feedback. Like it? Don't like it? Grass height seems low. That's what Erica says. I would short grass, lots of weeds, 100%. So this to me is an exercise area and not a pasture. These horses have grazed this ground extremely close. You can see the weeds that they won't eat that will happily survive whenever we've overgrazed a pasture. Weeds will take over super quick. And then you can also see this area here where, hey, look, there's a little bit more green grass here. It's a little taller, but you can also see there's kind of some horse manure in this area as well. So pretty great example of an overgrazed pasture and not what we're going to try to advise you guys to do. So when I think about pasture for horses, there's a number of things you got to keep in mind. Is what is your goal for having a pasture? For some people, it is having something that is aesthetically pleasing to look at. And if that's your goal, we can help you get there. For some people, the goal of your pasture is to feed the horse. Okay, and so we're going to manage a pasture to feed a horse a little bit differently than one that we just want it aesthetically to look amazing. Sometimes we may use it more as just supplemental grazing. So we're going to provide the forage for the horse, but we want them to have a little bit more time to consume grasses more naturally. A lot of times it's just exercise. We don't want the horse confined in a stall for 24 hours a day. And so the pasture allows the horse freedom of motion. And that is super, super important for mental health as well as just overall health, right? So for physical health as well. And again, never discount the idea that horses do need some free time to move around and to interact with their fellow horses. So super important. And increasingly, I think people are recognizing that housing horses on pasture is a good thing. Even show horses, even competitive horses, giving them time out can really help you out. Okay, so pasture systems, how you're going to manage them, again, is going to be what your goal is. So we can implement different strategies. If we're going to use, you're going to stay out 24/7. I'm going to manage that a little bit differently than if I'm going to like turn you out for 4 hours. Okay, so how much I can turn the horse out or how much I want him out is going to change how I manage the pasture and how I set those up. If you're going to use continuous grazing and you don't have 70 acres, I also really recommend using rotational grazing. And so since this is a small acreage farming series, most of you then should be thinking about using rotational grazing. Okay, it's a really effective strategy. We may also have them only on pasture during part of the year. So for me and how I manage my horses, they are on a dry lot during the dormant season. So I pull them all completely off, leave the pasture alone until it starts to regrow in the spring. They graze then for, about 6 to 7 months of the year, and they're fed hay the rest. So you don't have to do that. A lot of people keep them out the entire 12 months, but you probably will have to have some supplemental feeding in there as well. So it's kind of what works for you. And I'm not going to say that one answer is right or wrong. Again, it depends on what your finances are, what your manpower is, how many acres you have. So all of this, we can make it work depending on the situation. Okay. So once again, if I'm going to say, is it a pasture? My first criteria, is it safe? Okay. So generally when I think about, is pasture safe? I kind of have 3 areas to think about. One, is it free of toxic weeds and trees? So if it's not, then it is decidedly not safe. Does it have a safe fence? Because it does not have a safe fence, then that's another consideration. And then the other part about safety, honestly, I mean, you could have roving packs of wild dogs. We could throw in those for fun, but how horses interact with each other. So we can't forget that sometimes horses can be kind of not very nice to one another. And so if the social dynamics are off, then that pasture may not be safe either. So there's really kind of a multi-level thought process about, is it safe? And then again, if we're going to call it pasture, not just exercise or turnout, it actually has to have a stand of nutritious grass. It's something the horse can consume. The first picture I showed you does not count, right? Because that was all overgrazed. That's in really bad trouble. That probably needs to start over. So that's what we were looking for. It's got to be safe and it's got to have grass that's nutritious for the horse. If I'm talking about safety, again, a big criteria is fencing. Okay, now if I'm looking at this horse here, I'm automatically going to put this fence in my less safe category. Okay, so anybody know why I don't think this is a very appropriate horse fence? Anybody give me a guess? Okay, so the barbed wire. Yes, we do not recommend barbed wire for horses. Okay, now with that said, can you house horses in pastures with barbed wire effectively and safely? My answer on that is that it depends. The bigger the space the horse is in, the less likely they're going to run up against the fence. So in large areas, it may be, it's not perfect, and I'm not going to say like go do it, but it is less dangerous than when we start making spaces smaller and the horse has more desire to be on the other side or to interact with its neighbors, then it's going to start to be more and more dangerous. And even if the horse is in large spaces, the other thing I think about is the type of horse, right? So if they are going to get spooked, scared by something, etc., the more likely the horse is to run up against that fence line, the higher the risk of danger. Okay, so we don't want to do that. The other part of that is this is not horse mesh. Okay, anybody know why this is not what I would call good wire fencing for horses? What's wrong with the bottom part of this fence? Do you have an idea? Yeah, so this one, the spaces are too big. So if you're thinking about mesh fences with horses, they actually, the diamond or the no climb, or the spaces are much smaller, and then it's twined around each other, are going to be much safer. So this kind of wire, horses can get hooves in, and honestly, this looks like it'll break really easy. If you're using this fence on horses that are confined to a smaller area, expect that unless you've got a functioning hot wire on this one, it's going to take some damage. Okay, so this is not something I would use to confine horses in a small area without the aid of a hot tape or another electric element on there. Some other thoughts, I kind of already talked about that. The size of the area matters. Again, do you see barbed wire in Oklahoma? Of course, all the time, but in large pastures. Okay, so not in small areas. Small acreage, I would not recommend it, because there's just too much risk that that horse can actually hurt themselves. And so even if cattle will be fine, horses, because they panic in the nature of what they do, they rip themselves to shreds if they're caught in barbed wire. So this one is more of an electro braid. These are actually really nice fences. So it has a little bit of tensile strength as well as some electricity in it. And so those work really well on our smaller paddock sizes. So I put this picture in because to me, this is the epitome of a horse. So here we got our barbed wire fence. I'm guessing that this horse is in a pretty big size pasture. And look, there's lots of grass here, and yet he still is reaching his head over the fence to graze on the other side, because they're horses and they try to make you crazy. So even if you think like, oh, there's no reason this horse is ever going to push or lean on this fence, you would be surprised at what they may try to do. So yeah, that's just horse nature. Okay. For those of you that maybe have not grazed horses before, they're hard on pasture. Horses are super hard on pasture. So this picture here, I think, epitomizes, like, they can get it down to putting green height on pasture. That is how close a horse can crop grass. So they are super hard on it. And if you don't have species in your pasture that tolerate intense grazing, they'll kill it. Okay, so it's really easy for horses to kill lots of different species of grasses. And because they can be so selective about what they do, if there's something they like, and I can use my own pastures for an example, we've got some fescue in there. They love that fescue and they will eat it to the dirt before they will go eat native. So you literally have to force them to not eat it, or they will just eat it down to bare nubbins. So again, they're really hard on it. Horses will eat legumes if they're in pasture, but it's not their preferred. So typically when we're trying to introduce legumes to the diet of the horse, we feed them hay rather than grasses. So kind of little stinkers. So if you're doing a pasture renovation, you know, there's a reason that we use Bermuda quite a bit here. It grows well in Oklahoma, and it tolerates grazing to the ground really well. And so it is actually a pretty good grass choice here in Oklahoma. Some other things just to think about. Sorry, these got, I don't know what happened. They weren't like this morning. Again, horses do graze in that roughs and lawns category. So they will only utilize maybe about 50% of their pasture, and they'll use the rest as kind of latrine areas. And so you may find that, you know, for yield wise, horses will do better if you actually bale the hay and feed it to them, rather than how they utilize the pasture itself. So they can be pretty inefficient grazers. So kind of talked about that. I'm going to try to speed up here to the end. They'll kill it. So this, if you're on small acreage, this is going to be my answer, and that is using rotational grazing. And so the nice thing, horses do respect electricity quite a bit. And so if you have small acreage and you want to get the most you can out of forage with them, is that you'll actually kind of do this strip grazing. It's not any different than you would with cattle or other species, that essentially you're going to put the horses in a smaller area, restrict them from the other side until, couple of rules of thumb you could use, till about the grass is about 3 inches, maybe 2 inches if it's Bermuda, but don't go below that. Or if they've taken about 50% of the pasture or that strip off, and then you simply move them to the next side. So you still have to make sure that they have shelter, they have water, all of that. But this actually will make the horses, all their friends, eat it much more uniformly, and then they won't do as much of the species preference. They tend to eat it much more uniform if you restrict that size. So this is actually like an acre strip lot here. And so the other nice thing about that is you also won't get as much of your latrine formation. And so they'll be a little bit more uniform in where the manure is. Downside for parasites, but plus for kind of distributing manure for fertilization purposes. But if you want to have horses grazing for nutrient consumption, for meeting part of their fiber requirement, and you don't want to kill your pasture, then really rotational grazing is going to be the strategy that you're going to need to employ there. Other questions, I'll just do super fast here. A lot of people always ask about how much it is per head, like how many acres do you need per horse? And again, it depends on what do you have growing there. So a lot of places you'll see the whole 1 to 2 acres, but a lot of all of that work is actually done up north, where the growing season is much more intense and plants grow much faster and much more vibrantly, I guess, during the growing season versus Oklahoma. So we typically would say a horse needs 5 to 6 acres if it's improved pasture, 10 to 15 if it's native, and then if you're on rangeland, you're going to need quite a bit. So this is actually obviously improved pasture here with some strip grazing of these horses. So, okay, there's a ton. I could go any direction you want with horses, but I thought I would stop at this point in time. And then if anybody has questions, we can cover that now.
If anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat, and we'll give you a couple minutes.
And again, I'm a jack of all trades. So if you have any horse questions, I can try to handle them. Well, it must be a very educated audience then.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you, Dr. Heine. We appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, our next speaker today is going to be Dr. Marley Beam. Dr. Beam, are you on here?
I am here.
Okay.
Shall I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And please, if I miss something in the chat or if I'm running slow or something, just holler and let me know how
Okay.
to modify things. I appreciate that. So
I will let you know.
it is great to be here with you this afternoon or this evening. And I'm going to try to hit some of the highlights that are associated with common pond issues. Some required language here at the beginning. We try to get the message out to everybody. If you have any special requirements, always let us know. Ponds are extremely common in Oklahoma. In fact, in terms of ponds per square mile, we're the #1 state. So much so that one of my favorite things to say is if you have rural land in Oklahoma and you don't have a pond, you're underprivileged. So more people seem to have ponds than don't. But the #1 problem, I think, with ponds is just simple neglect. People have a lot of things in their work life, in their family life, and in the management of their land. Ponds tend to get left somewhere at close to the bottom of the list. This is a pond that I used to drive by for many years, going and coming from work, until finally one day I had to stop and just take a picture of it. Problems develop slowly in ponds, and this one is suffering from severe erosion along the water line there of the dam. I'm afraid the dam is not going to last. It's the kind of thing that doesn't happen all at once, but if you're not paying attention, you don't know to watch for something, or perhaps it's an absentee landowner situation. I don't know what the whole story was, but you can get into some very expensive or difficult to solve problems if you don't catch it early enough. This gentleman, Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, had a saying that I want to kind of use as the theme of the meeting. It's not the things we don't know that get us into trouble. It's the things we do know that just ain't so. And there are a number of misconceptions or wrong-headed, I guess, idea. I don't know how to say that diplomatically, but people have some ideas about ponds that oftentimes are not correct. So I'm going to try to point out some of those issues. This is a livestock watering pond. I think it was obviously built to water livestock, but wow, is it really heavily used? And I think it's getting to the point where it's probably, I'm not a vet, but having that strong a concentration of cattle in the water, fouling the water is definitely a problem. There may be some parasite issues occasionally in hoof type situations. So even if we don't care about the aesthetics of the pond, having too much cattle access to a pond can be a problem. Ultimately, it's the landowner's decision. But again, don't just coast into something without worrying about some of those water quality issues that really affect livestock gain. If the water turns foul long before it's undrinkable, they'll be reducing the amount of gain. Of course, they may be seeking shade. Do you have shade on your land where your cattle can get cool during the warmer months of the year? If not, then that could be a part of the problem why the cattle are always in the pond. So that's a related issue. I'm not promoting this for everybody, but in some cases, fencing might be an option, and allowing the cattle access to one hardened watering point, which you see down here at the bottom. Some geotextile and gravel cattle do adapt pretty well, going on the herd order of dominance on who taking turns drinking, and they seem to do pretty well with this kind of thing. And we usually see a big improvement in water quality and a slower rate of damage to the slopes when these systems are implemented. That said, most people don't have them, so maybe most people don't have a high enough concentration of cattle to really require them, but it's an option I'm putting out there for your consideration. One of the ideas that I think is a big mistake is to think that any plant growing in a pond is a weed and therefore is a bad thing. Please remember that plants, whether you're talking on the land or in our case in a pond, have some benefits. And one of those benefits is they reduce erosion. You wouldn't want bare soil or you'd have terrible erosion. Likewise, without plants, you're going to have erosion on the shoreline, along the shorelines most often because of wave action or a little bit of cattle traffic in and out, those kinds of things. So there is a benefit in that regard to having a certain amount of plants in the pond and not being too fastidious about wanting to get rid of everything. That's a hard job that's going to require you to keep treating over and over and over again, pretty much continuously with herbicides. So the benefits of plants, aesthetics may not be pleasing in this pond entirely, or you may just get used to this. But these plants are beneficial especially if you're concerned at all, if one of your objectives for the pond is fishing. One of the most critical natural foods for fish are insects, and submerged plant beds, about 20 to 30% coverage of the pond are considered optimal from a fishing point of view. They provide those very nutritious and important insects for the smaller fish, and some fish never get past the insect stage. Likewise, those submerged weed beds provide cover for the smaller fish to escape predation from the bass. Now, the bass will be patrolling the edges and they'll catch the unwary ones, but it provides a good balance, a refuge so that the bass are not going to put the pond into a state of imbalance by eating too much of their own food supply. They're going to have a more secure food supply, and the fish, the prey fish species are going to be still be able to be thinned down by the bass enough so that they have enough to eat also. So remember, especially on the windswept ponds, that wave action can be a big issue. And nature's solution are these emergent plants on the edge of the pond. The root systems are there; they're adapted to growing in water. Obviously, these are aquatic plants, but they do a job that the domestic grasses cannot do. Domestic grasses cannot grow in saturated water, and you just begin to have a problem with that. Cattails are around. They're going to get to your pond sooner or later. Those seeds go everywhere. Kind of monitor and see, if anytime that anything new appears or anything begins to become more and more abundant, pick up the phone or send an email to the county extension folks and start working on it. Don't just let it expand year 1, year 2, year 3. That's how we run into major aquatic plant problems when they become overabundant. Cattails aren't entirely bad, but they cause a lot of grief, especially if your pond has a lot of shallow areas. Always watch out for floating plants. And this is primarily a big issue on ponds that catch no wind. If you have a pond that's down in a hollow or is sheltered by lots of trees, then you're going to have problems with things like duckweed, or the smaller plant here, we see the watermeal. These are free-floating plants. Never let a pond totally get blanketed by free-floating plants. You must have sunlight penetrating down into the water column in order to have photosynthesis in the water column to produce oxygen. Without oxygen, that's the main source of oxygen. And if you throw a blanket over the pond, so to speak, with these floating plants, you're going to lose your fish. Common submerged plant, sometimes a problem, but oftentimes not a problem, is coontail. And here's a little bit of that typical shoreline erosion. If there were some aquatic plants in this water body that were emergent things on the edge of the pond, we would not be seeing this erosion here. It doesn't look bad, but you have to realize things happen slowly over a multiple year basis. And this may be heading towards some grief, depending on the predominant wind direction and how much distance that wind has to go across the pond before it strikes that shoreline area. I have seen people sometimes deliberately allow cattails to grow in a very windswept situation to protect against erosion. They would get after it in other parts of the pond with herbicides on a regular basis, but on the downwind side, they would allow them to be there, and indeed they form a very effective barrier against wave erosion. Often called lilies or water lilies, these are not really lilies. Superficially, the flowers look alike, but this is a American lotus, and doesn't have a slit in the leaf like a lily would. Anytime you have a very shallow water body, this is one of the big risks. For sure, I think sometimes people plant these deliberately because they're pretty, but unless you like the looks of this instead of water, if you see this in a shallow pond getting started, again, please pick up the phone, send us some photos over to your county extension office so we can try to consult a bit on this before it gets to this stage where it's almost just a nightmare to try to treat. This is a little bit of a trick caption here on this slide. This is a Blue Stem Lake, I believe, up in Osage County. One of the prettiest pictures I've seen that would show what I'm trying to show here is that a pond is more than just the water basin. The pond also is the watershed that feeds that pond with runoff water. And it's very few ponds where one person owns the entire watershed for the pond. Usually you're having to have multiple landowners in the watershed. And we need to recognize the watershed and watch out for certain things going on in the watershed, because it can definitely impact your pond in a negative way. Some of our worst ponds are those with urban watersheds or neighborhoods ponds that have lots and lots of chemical fertilizer runoff from ponds, leading to algae problems in particular. But anything that's opening up the soil to erosion, such as construction projects or county section line roads, those things can put off a tremendous amount of mud and silt. It can instantly, in very short order, turn a nice pond muddy. And while you're moaning over the muddiness of the pond, you're not realizing that the silt is filling up the volume of your pond and shallowing out wherever it's accumulating. Got to watch out for livestock runoff, waste runoff. I've already talked about fertilized lawns. And weirdly enough, other ponds can be a source of problems if they are above your pond. If you're trying to manage for fishing and there are undesirable species of fish above you, they will move down slope pretty readily whenever there's an overflow event. So that's something we always try to scope out and make sure that people are aware of before they go to a lot of effort to try to improve the fishing. You're at the mercy of any fish that may be coming in from higher ponds. Trees on dams are a very common issue. So dams certainly do not take care of themselves. So here we've got a nice illustration of a disastrous pond situation that can happen pretty readily when people are not aware of the risks of letting trees grow. Tree roots will weaken the compacted soil of the dam and can provide a means for water to begin trickling through your dam, especially if they happen to intersect with some animal burrows. Probably our leading villain in this regard are our beaver. Beaver are always on the move. There's a new crop of them every spring. They're looking for new territory, and they love the steep sides of dams. They can have their start their burrow underwater, dig up into it, have a nice crown up here. And so that can be a problem if the tree roots intersect that, or if it's bad enough and that den collapses, you can have overtopping and lose your dam. It's very expensive. You don't want to let this get away from you, but unfortunately, many people are already in a situation where they have lots of trees. But we can talk about that if that's your particular situation. I may not have the exact answer for you, but we can explore that with you. Burrowing or other problems, if you see water gushing out of your dam, there's not very much that can be done about it. This dam is pretty much a goner. So it's all about awareness, making sure that beaver, getting out there and sitting out on the dam a little bit at night and watching and listening for beaver slapping their tails and that sort of thing to make sure that that they're not around, and then getting in touch with some animal damage type folks who can give you good advice on how to deal with them before something gets to this terrible stage. Most pond owners, I wish we had a time machine for them so they could go back in time to when their pond was built and they could build a better structure. Most typical ponds in Oklahoma are built pretty much as low a cost as possible, which means steep sides and narrow top. Those are very vulnerable, as we see in the bottom ones, to beaver damage, to tree damage, to erosion, and all those things. If you can see your way towards investing the extra money in a wider top to the dam and gentler slopes, it's going to greatly reduce problems with these issues. But given that we're living the present, we can't go back in time, or we're limited by money or whatever, it's a good idea to give your dam a very close inspection at least once a year, if not more often. And that usually involves walking the faces of the dam to look for any signs of seepage or cracking or burrowing activity of any sort. The temptation is just to walk along the top and look over, but unless you have very well mowed faces, I think you're not going to be able to see anything. You got to get out and get on the face of the dam to do that kind of inspection, put some flags out, and maybe take some pictures, and we can get you in touch with perhaps the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they're the pond structure experts. I can give you, your county folks or I can give you some general advice, but for more expert advice, we always point people towards NRCS. Those spillways are an issue. The overflow, those flat, broad overflows around the end of the dam. Here we see what looks like a very beautifully constructed dam. It's got put a lot of effort into it, but we see that the spillway here in the foreground has no grass coverage at all. You want very good turf coverage on this. It looks like the cattle are using this as a trail, and so it's just bare soil. And you see the beginnings of a very serious problem here. At the arrow, that is the start of a head cut. If you don't recognize it, or you say, I'm too busy, I'll deal with that next year or the year after it, you just may end up with something that looks like this, a gully that is growing exponentially bigger and deeper every time you have an overflow event. Whenever you see a head cut getting started in your spillway, ask for advice, or do what needs to be done to repack that and revegetate it so that you don't end up with a major disaster like this one. Putting off weed treatments. This is a common mistake also, that we get too many sad calls from folks that have ponds that are 90+% occupied by plants. And again, we need a time machine to go back and get after this most effectively. A little bit on fishing if we have time. Some highlights of issues with fishing, and there are fact sheets to talk about all of these issues, and I'll give you a link to all of our fact sheets here towards the end. Don't let me forget to do that. I'd say that the number one mistake I see that people commonly make when they decide that they want to improve the quality of the fishing is they say they're going to go out and spend a good chunk of money on a bunch of fingerlings to stock in the pond. The reason I very seldom recommend doing this is because almost every pond has a bass population or a population of other predators in it. And those expensive little fingerlings just get gobbled up. They're basically hors d'oeuvres for the big bass. So we don't recommend that. We try to save people money and avoid them making that mistake. Another mistake or problem that we see very commonly is that there are problem species of fish in the pond. So we encourage people to identify all the fish that are in the pond to the best of their ability, and the fact sheet that we have shows some typical pictures, and or you can send us some pictures. But there are species that sometimes people like to catch, like to eat, but they just don't allow for good production of sustainable, good quality fishing in the pond, such as the green sunfish, aka google-eyed perch here at the top. Fun to catch, great to eat, but they're just too aggressive. You got to look at the mouth on that guy. It's a big mouth. It's almost like a bass among the sunfish or group. Very aggressive, and it just gets into. It's a direct competitor against the smaller bass and causes problems with balance between predator and prey, and overabundance of fish that is not good for fishing. Similar for crappie, they compete too strongly against the bass for insects, and they may be okay for a few years, and then they'll have 1 year where they have just an explosive population growth, lots and lots of young ones, and you'll get tens of thousands of these guys in your pond. They stunt because there's just not enough food to eat, and the bass, in a pond situation at least, can't keep them cropped down effectively. Less controversial would be mudcats. Nobody likes these, so it's not too hard a job to talk about the problems here with these guys. The small catfish that never get large. They don't have a notch in the tail to speak of. So know your fish and understand which species are desirable and which are not. Talk with us or with the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation fisheries biologists about what some options are if your pond is not, the fishing is not good in your pond. Another very common issue with ponds imbalance is that people return every bass that they catch back to the pond. When you do that, the bass population is going to get overpopulated. You do need to keep at least some of your bass. As you can see here, these guys are getting on the skinny side. So anytime, in general, any species of fish that you see in your pond that is getting skinny, it's not in good condition, sorry, you need to thin that out. And it's perfectly good management to take some bass out of the pond. Unfortunately, many people have been schooled in this sort of the mantra of, catch and release, and it doesn't work well in ponds. Some bass do need to be harvested. So I hope I haven't discouraged you by talking about too many problems, but ponds are just not naturally beautiful and without any issues. Oftentimes when people buy a property, they look at the pond is a big selling point, and they think, this is a paradise. I love the looks of this pond. Please don't be suckered into thinking that's the way it is naturally. You're going to have to be watching for all of these hazards and recognizing the problems and getting after things early to do a little preemptive management before these kinds of problems can develop. If you do that, if you are willing to put in that time and the effort in learning what needs to be monitored, you can have a good pond. But it does take work. I do have a fact sheet. I'm sorry, not a fact sheet, a Facebook page. It's a little inactive, but there's still a good amount of information. If you'll look for managing Oklahoma ponds, that would get you to it. And if you want to click or take the time to use this QR code here, this will get you to about 90% of our pond management fact sheets. I don't have everything here in that grouping, but it'll get you to most of it. And if you have any specific issues, facts.okstate.edu, just search for the problem, and you're going to be able to come up with some fact sheets on algae, toxic algae, fish kills, pond muddiness, any number of those common issues. But that's one thing. If you like to read and do some research on your own, great. But we are here as your extension service, both through your local county educators and through me as their backup to try to work with you. Generally, we're going to ask a lot of questions. We're not trying to pester you, but we want to get the big picture so we can come up with the best solutions for you to try out in managing any problems that you may be having. So I believe that is my last slide. I don't know if I've gone too fast or too slow, but if people are pond owners, they have a question about pond weeds or something of that sort, we may be able to get started with some of that if there are questions, but I don't know. So I'm opening up the floor to any ideas you might have or questions you may have.
Dr. Beam, we have one question in the chat so far.
Yeah.
Hey, it says, are grass carp good for algae control in the pond?
Grass carp do not like algae. They don't do very well. They have a persnickety sort of appetite, and algae. Sometimes the young grass carp will eat this long, stringy filamentous algae. But in terms of the other algae, the algae that just makes the water green or forms scums on the surface, they can't consume that at all. So algae, we need to go through those 12 or so questions that we try to share with everybody to find out, what may be happening in terms of the nutrient situation in the pond, whether there are other plants in the pond, and if not, maybe we can get some other plants in the pond to compete against the algae. Maybe those plants have been eliminated by overuse of herbicides, and that's just created an ideal situation, high nutrients and no competition. Those are the kinds of things we look at with algae. Yes, there are herbicides, but herbicides are pretty frustrating because algae just keeps coming back. There's always survivors, and it repopulates pretty fast. So we try to get at it on the basis of seeing what might be practical to reduce nutrients, to improve, enhance competition. If there are some other plants that could be let to get started in the pond naturally or however. And sometimes we use dyes to reduce light penetration. It has to be done before the algae gets too bad, though. It's a preventative, not something you do after the fact. Or if you already have a serious algae problem, we probably need to knock it back and or wait until springtime would certainly be the safer thing to do. Start it in the spring before things start growing in, and consider some of these aquatic dyes. So that's those are the highlights on algae, but it's certainly a frustrating problem and a very common problem.
Okay, looks like we got one more question. It says, my pond is ringed with cattails, lots of carpy and several small bass, a few bluegill. Any recommendations regarding improving bass fishing?
Okay. All right. Well, we're looking for the limiting factor on bass is the bluegill population. They're the forage base for the bass, and so we need to kind of keep some good records, maybe just mentally, on how the what is the abundance of the large, the medium, and the small bluegill in the pond. In other words, the year 3 ones, the year 2 ones, and the year 1 ones. You would like to see a good abundance of both, of all three, so that you'd have something to feed all the different sizes of bass. So unfortunately, we don't have the manpower. I don't think anybody has the manpower unless you are very friendly and on good terms with the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation to come out and do a detailed survey of the pond to tell you how to do that. So instead, we have a fact sheet called Improve Fishing in Your Pond, or just Improve Fishing, that kind of talks about this idea of trying to identify, whether the bluegill population is of the right abundance and in the right condition to indicate that the bass are getting enough to eat. So that would be the first thing I would look at, is trying to get a feel for the year 1, the year 2, and the year 3 kind of bluegill in the pond based on what you're catching in the pond. So the cattail issue, unless that's okay, only seeing large ones. Okay, yeah, you need reproduction every year, and if you're not getting reproduction, it could be that especially if those large bluegill are skinny, it could be that there's just too many of them, and it could be that they are too big for the bass to eat. So upon if the bluegill get to a size where there's all of the bluegill are too large to eat, they're going to eat all of the insects in the pond, and they're going to mob the nests when the bass lay eggs and even when the other bluegill lay eggs, so that they will prevent reproduction. So my hunch is you may need, especially if those large bluegill are skinny, you may need to be more aggressively harvesting the larger bluegill. But everything is kind of an art without having detailed, a survey of the pond being done. But I think that's what I would lean towards exploring, at least experiment with that and see if that won't bring the populations back into balance. Kind of a off the cuff quickie analysis of it. But again, if you can get the wildlife department out to look at your pond, I don't say everybody can do that, but they can do a survey of some sort. That would be perfect. But generally, we have to rely on your impressions of what the catch is looking like. Okay. Cattails, you mentioned cattails. If they're not bothering you, as long as they're not expanding and you don't have a lot of shallow areas less than 3.5 feet in depth, nothing wrong with cattails. But just be wary of expansion into shallow areas, and don't let it get year after year going until you've got a really tough situation to deal with. It may need, in some cases, you need to do a little bit of herbicide application to restrict the growth of those things.
Okay, I don't see any more questions.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions? Well, thank you, Dr. Beam. That was very informative. And I just want to close by saying our next small acreage series will be on October 3rd, and it will be over fall garden preparation. We look forward to seeing everyone then. Thank you, everyone, again. Thank you, Dr. Beam.
All right. Thank you.